Welcome to Chaps Many Cultures, episode 129. This is a wonderful Thursday. Someone tell me what it's like upstairs. I don't know. I don't even know what the weather looks like today yet. But welcome. Today we have another special guest. How about that? I love having guests. Yesterday was great. Today promises to be just as great. And we're going to talk about blending cultures from somebody who's done a little bit of traveling around the world, or in his case, bumbling, which I like that term. I think that's rather self-deprecating and honest. Bumbling. I think that's a good word. We should use it more. Let's get into the episode, shall we? Yes, it is the show about the business of culture and the culture of business. Two chaps, many cultures. How are you today, pal?
Well, I am well, considering the circumstances. And how are you, my chap?
I'm just finer than frog's fur.
Frog's fur. All right. One of those phrases I will get used to one day. These Aussies and their interesting terms. Oh, gosh.
Well, think about it. Have you ever seen the fur on a frog?
Maybe there are some. Who knows?
Well, if there are, they're awfully fine, aren't they? Very, very fine. And that's why we use the term fine as frog's fur, because you can't really see it. It's there, but it's pretty fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode. And I want to say thank you to Crystal, who was on our program yesterday, and it got kind of hijacked by current events, and she played along just fine. And we still managed to talk about what she came for. So kudos again to Crystal yesterday. It was not the easiest episode for us to do. And I guess today is one of those days where we're still, many of us in the United States and abroad who are watching what's going on in this country are still processing the current events and still analyzing, figuring out what's next. Don't look at us to tell you what's next, because we are not smart enough to have the answers. We simply are observers of culture and how culture plays out. And yesterday and today, we saw the US culture play out in its different facets. And for us as interculturalists, it behooves us to be astute observers of what's going on, and not to jump to conclusions, but to deduct from empirical evidence and from observation. Right, Brett?
Absolutely. Speaking of observing, when you're traveling around the world and living in the world, being of the world in different places, no doubt we do a little bit of observing, and we bring back with those observations certain knowledge. And we got someone today who's turned that knowledge into a business and a practice, not unlike what we do, which is always fun. We're like people, self-admiration society. We love, talking to people that do our stuff, because we're not, as Christian says, not the experts in everything. So we bring people on who really know what they're talking about. Let's introduce him today, Jerry Jones. How are you, sir?
Welcome to the program, sir. Let me make your mic hot so you can actually talk to us. Thanks for joining us, Jerry. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Finer than frog's fur.
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
It wasn't my saying. Anybody can use it. That's right. There's a license. Absolutely.
Now is that an Aussie saying? Because I feel like I've heard that in maybe Kentucky or somewhere around here. I don't know.
No, I don't think it's an Aussie saying. No, I just, that's what I used to always use, so it probably originated somewhere else, as all good ideas do, but no, I don't think it's particularly Aussie. We have some certain Aussie ones, but
that's a good one if it is.
Some of the Aussie ones are just not suitable for public broadcast.
I've heard some
well,
of those.
They might be, because most of us outside of Australia won't even understand how it's unsuitable. Brett shared an example with me a couple of days ago, and he's like, hey, look at this tongue-in-cheek Aussie phrase. I'm like, I don't see the tongue in cheek. How is this?
Right.
Here.
Yeah, it loses something when you have to explain it, right?
Oh, it does. Yeah, it kind of does. Yeah, it puts a whole new term for rooting for a team. Put it that way. And
Right.
those Aussies that are watching this will know what that understands.
I caught that. I have Aussie friends.
You caught that. You know what that means.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Well, welcome, Jerry. Thank you for making the time to join us, and it's a real honour to have you. As you know, the high-powered media personality that you are, world traveller, world knowledge taker, and as I mentioned in the intro, the bumbling traveller, which is great. I think this is fun. It's always good to bumble around as you travel. So, I guess tell us about that. Tell us I had in the image the Culture Blend, which is a website, one of your websites, I guess. So that was what we're interested in, the blend of culture, because you've been around the traps a little bit. So tell us about the elevator pitch. Doesn't have to be 30 seconds.
Oh boy. So my family and I have spent most of the last 14 years in China. I've done a lot of different work there, working with international companies, international schools, equipping their people to do their thing better. And that's taken on several different roles, different forms. COVID kind of pushed us out of China, brought an end to that. And so we jumped to Malta to make what I do a little more accessible to more people, a broader scope of people, Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. Was very much looking forward to that, and things just, COVID continued and things didn't go as planned. And so for right now, we're back in the States and kind of regrouping and seeing what we can do from here. How's that was that 30 seconds? I don't know.
Look at that.
It was very bumbly. Yeah, I like that.
Thank you, everybody.
It was very bumbly. Yeah.
We'll see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
There you go. Hey, that's been good.
So tell me about the 14 years in China. I'm curious because especially from a North American perspective, the image of China has been morphing in those very 14 years, and there's always been I would say a very undereducated view of what China is like in the quote-unquote Western world. So for somebody who grew up in the US, how did you experience those 14 years, and maybe how did you experience change happening in those 14 years?
Yeah. So China, the morphing, the changing of China during that 14 years was, for me, it felt astronomical. Maybe not for Chinese people, but there was so much change. Like when we went, it was kind of, you could see it coming. You could see the economy changing. You could see they were this emerging power and really kind of coming onto the world stage and doing their thing. And that happened while we were there. Like it really changed a lot. And for us, I mean, just on a ground level, we watched it in our daily lives, just the way we got it. You do that foreigner thing and you go to another country and it's kind of like the first questions are, oh, what can you get there? What can you buy there? And you learn the tricks and the, how to find what you need and which markets to go to. And it moved from that to by the end of it, it was really one of the most convenient places we could ever imagine living. It was just like everything was at the touch of your phone. The Taobao and which is like Chinese Amazon, huge. I called it slow magic, which like magic is you wish for something, you wave your wand and it's there. This is a little slower because you wish for it, you go to your phone, you touch a few buttons, you wait a day or two and it shows up at your door. So it was kind of slower than magic, but it was still magic. Like it was, and we just watched the affluence of China kind of emerge, that emerging middle class and a lot of money. We saw more amazing cars Lamborghinis and Ferraris driving around our neighborhood than we've ever seen anywhere in the world. So there was a lot of change, and then we just kind of got a glimpse of how that was impacting the culture. You know, I think it was Hofstede who said, like, the dimensions of culture, like, they don't change for centuries. They don't ever change except when there's the introduction of huge sums of money in a short period of time, and we watched that just kind of impact generationally in China, the gaps between the generation who was growing older and this new emerging younger generation. That was definitely present, and so it was fascinating. Like, it was for people like us who love to watch culture. It was a great place to have a front row seat.
Especially the generational aspect that you just mentioned. I've had this experience sporadically and not enough to have an educated opinion on, but my pulse read so far has been that the millennials, or I don't want to call them millennials because that's such a Western term, but the generation of young Chinese who grew up with this growing wealth, with this explosion of wealth, especially in urban centers, they seem to value these core principles of Confucianism a little less than their elders did. This network of mutual obligations and relationship, the Guangxi that we hear about and read about, that has taken on a different meaning for this younger generation who has learned to have slow magic happen right in front of them, and who has access to things that their parents and grandparents didn't have. Is that only my remote perception, or would you agree that this is something that's drastically changing the fabric of Chinese culture?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is drastic, and I would say that not from my, like, we were so far removed. Like, we speak some Chinese, we get around, we learned how to live there as foreigners, but just the connection that we've had to kind of even some of the older generation. I recently did it was a webinar for it was 150 parents who were sending their kids abroad to study, 150 Chinese parents. And I do all the cultural stuff and do all the anecdotes and stories, and this is about culture. And then we got down to the Q&A time, and the only question that came out was, how do I send my kid abroad without them losing their connection to China and to family and to, like, that was the concern of the parents, was we want this for our kids because we know it's good for them. It's going to be good for us in the long run. But I feel like they are detaching from the things that the values that we've tried to place in them. And so I think there is kind of maybe a widespread panic in that older generation, looking at the younger generation, seeing them emerge, having all the things that they dreamed of when they were their age, but saying, okay, like, at what cost does that come? And are they going to hold on to those Confucian values, or are they going to just adapt and adopt all of the Western values? So I definitely think they feel that. And again, that's even though we live there, that's a excuse me, that's an outsider's perspective, because we are certainly not not in that as deep as we could be.
How do you navigate? Because I think this is something that maybe I've sometimes struggle with, that detachment from that really personal question that comes in about even just expats themselves, who say, how much of myself am I going to lose when I go abroad? And this is that you've just brought up a great point about a parent who's pushing their young offspring on a boat, pushing them off the shore, not pushing them away, but basically giving them what they would consider an opportunity. But that how do you then, as a cultural trainer, advise a parent on that? Because you just reminded me of a situation with a young Chinese professional where it was, he had some questions, mainly because he hadn't been exposed by his parents to the possibility of this, and I guess his unpreparedness. So, you want them to try to take on and adopt the business culture that they're going to in terms of their day-to-day, because they have to be operationally successful as business professionals. But then how do you then advise them, given the fact that, we can't advise them how to live their life? But I don't know whether that question makes sense. But how do you navigate that? I find that sometimes difficult in the heat of the moment when you're in these discussions.
Sure. Yeah, it is difficult. And for me, there's multiple paths or multiple kind of lanes of discussion, and each of them has a kind of a different dynamics and different variables surrounding it. For one, I feel like it's really essential to understand that that it's normal. Like it's natural when you cross cultures to go through that phase. I think we've all done that at some level of really kind of being hard on your own culture, because especially when it's the first time, right? You get to see your own culture through the lenses of a different culture, and it's just like all these things emerge and explode onto the scene, and so we get really judgmental, and I think especially for people who have been extremely monocultural, which is China, for the most part. Once they step out of it and see and they have discussions, they go to university and they start having these conversations that they've been shielded from all of their life. It's a normal thing to at least go through a phase of being judgy and kind of coming down hard on your own culture and letting that be a phase, like letting that happen, not panicking, not freaking out, but seeing what emerges from that. Then there's like another lane of, okay, like if you want your offspring to be connected to your own culture, then you got to step back and think, okay, what can I do? And again, not panicking, not being domineering, not insisting, but what are the practical, everyday, real life things that I can do to put that in there, to put that in front of them, so that they are experiencing the good things about their culture and learning to love their culture and staying connected to that culture. And then there's a dozen other paths where you can just kind of step back and really just kind of from a coaching perspective, saying, where do we want this to end? When in 10 years, when my kids are out there doing this thing that they've dreamed of and that I've dreamed of for them, what do I want that to look like? And then you can walk backwards from there and chart out the steps to try to get there. And ultimately, it's that same thing we all face as parents of my kids are going to grow up and they're going to be their own people. And yeah, right. They are going to make their own decisions, whether I want them to or not. So.
You brought up a point that just got my dominoes flipping over in my head. There's the phase of going into another culture where you depreciate your own culture, where you develop critical views of your native culture. And that is something that I think the three of us can attest to, that happens. And then there is the pendulum swings back, and then you reconnect with your native culture, and you almost grasp to those old cultural values and tenets that you almost let go of. It's like this Tarzan in the jungle swinging from one rope to the next, where we're holding on to one and trying to let go of the other, but not really sure which one's better. So there is this back and forth, and I cannot speak for you, but for me now, having lived outside of my native culture for more than 15 years, I've not landed anywhere. I'm holding both robes
Yeah.
I'm not in the shape that Tarzan was in. I find myself agreeing with certain aspects of my native culture and also agreeing with aspects of the culture I choose to live in.
Right.
And I have a different vision now. I used to have these blinders. I could see this direction or that direction. Now the
Right.
blinders are open. I have more peripheral vision, and I'm trying to reconcile different viewpoints. I'm trying to I'm not trying. I am reconciling different value systems, and I find myself being frustrated with those who lack this peripheral vision. And I'm not trying to sound elitist or arrogant, but it's I think this is the crux of those of us who have lived abroad, that we have seen things that we cannot unsee. We have expanded our minds, and it won't go back to its original dimensions. And it's hard for us to relate sometimes to those who haven't been on that same journey. Do you guys agree?
Wholeheartedly. Like I think that's the beauty and the value of living cross-culturally is you get that opportunity to, like, you've got access to a broader range of values and systems and ideas, and then once you've kind of worked through the pendulum swing and the mass onset of that, then you've got some things to choose from, and you can actually take a look at them and say, oh, okay, in this situation, these guys do it really, really well, and in this situation, hey, actually, we've got a handle on that, and we always have, and so you do have that access, as opposed to people who are kind of in a herd mentality where they've only seen one thing. And I love that. I think it's great, but I also think, like, you're triggering that idea in me is that can again lead to an arrogance and an idea like, okay, we're the ones now who. So it's kind of like wherever you are, we're the ones who have it figured out, right? And so being able to step back from that and rationally look at all of the ideas and the evidence, and then have those conversations with people, whether they're in a herd or whether they've been out of the herd or whatever that is, that leads to some really rich things. And if you remain open to that, then you just continue to grow and change and shift and experience all of that.
How long have you been back to the US from abroad now that you're here in the US again?
About a month.
And are you recognizing some repatriation things in your mind, in your world?
Well, I don't know that it's so surreal. Like, this is different. We've repatriated before. We came back for a couple years in the middle of our China journey. And so all of those textbook things, the things that we've all talked about and we've written about, and we kind of help people through that repatriation part. It feels like it's getting washed out in the chaos this time, just with all the political stuff and COVID, and like, it's just a different. And yet in there, like somewhere in there, there's these remnants, these pieces of that. So absolutely, like, we're back. It's a struggle. It's challenging. We feel like foreigners in a place that we grew up in. We're relearning how to do things. And so yesterday we had the whole I got my driver's license updated. We got license plates for our car, which we haven't bought a car in 15 years. We did that, and my daughter got her driving permit. And it was just kind of like, I don't know how to do all of this, and to get this, we got to get this paper. And it was reminiscent of being in China, but we always had somebody to walk us through that. I'm like, where's my person? Where's my translator to come along and help me figure all of this out? And then in the end,
there you heard people. If you go to Missouri, even as an American, you need a translator. That's the lesson here.
I mean, it must be quite an experience for the people on the receiving end of you in these organisations to look at somebody who's got the accent, got the language, you should know what they're talking about. Say, yeah, I'm from here, but listen, I don't know how to do this. Right. That's a weird experience, right?
How do I use this debit card? I can't remember. Like, do I swipe it? Do I push it in? Do I push buttons?
Absolutely. You mentioned your children. You said your children. So your daughter. You're talking about that. Who's come back. I mean, let's assume that she's ostensibly grown up outside of this country for most of her life, right? So that identity must be quite an interesting one for you to watch from a proud parent's point of view.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. My daughter, who is 17, she's very much the observer. Like she's quiet. She sits back and watches and just kind of soaks it in. And every once in a while brings out some type of a comment. And it's that moment when I remember, oh yeah, like you didn't grow up here, like you. And so we have those conversations. And then my son, who's 11, is the commentator. He's not absorbing it. He's just talking about it, and says whatever is on his mind, whatever he's thinking, however it strikes him in the moment. He's got a comment on it. So it is fun.
Nice.
That's great.
I want to touch upon something that, I mean, I've been following your work for years, Jerry, when you were still in China, and thank you for putting out great content. It's always been refreshing to get an additional perspective that you don't see every day. So I would definitely put you in that category of people with an educated view in the world that is not the same that we've been seeing. And just recently, you got yourself a co-conspirator like Brett and I do, and you're hosting a podcast. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so it's called Diesel and Clooney Unpack the World. It's Chris O'Shaughnessy and myself, which
it's not
a lot
Diesel
of people.
and Clooney. It's not Vin and George who are doing it. It's you and somebody else. Okay.
It is. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's like me and when I get around Texas. And I say my name, everybody, oh, you own the Dallas Cowboys. And so I get washed out. And then, but living a global life, I try to tell that as a joke, right? Like I'm not the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and people are like, who are the Dallas Cowboys? Like that's the challenge of this. Yeah. So it's not Vin Diesel and George Clooney. There's backstory to the name, but it's Chris O'Shaughnessy and myself, which is a huge disappointment to the people who listened and thought they were coming for something else. But Chris is a writer, is a speaker, is a TCK. Grew up all over the world. I'm now doing similar things to Chris, and yet I grew up in a very monocultural place, and so we just kind of unpack different global things from that perspective, having two very different backgrounds, but doing very, very similar things. And it's always a fun conversation. We're not overthinking it. We just jump in and start talking, and we have a lot of fun.
So who's the Clooney and who's the Diesel in your
I'm Clooney. I'm Clooney. He's Diesel.
Oh, obviously. Okay. Sorry. How could I? I'm sorry.
Isn't it obvious?
Yeah, we'll see what you say when he comes on.
Well, you said there's a backstory, so I'm not gonna let you off the hook so easily. So, can you divulge?
Okay, I can give you. I haven't talked to Chris about this, but I can give you the quick version.
Yeah, okay, you got to go ahead.
Is that there are very fun stories in both of our cross-cultural experiences, one where he has been compared to Vin Diesel, and one where I was compared to George Clooney. And I'll throw this in. On the very same day, I was also compared to Mr. Bean. And so, but you know what? I mean, if you're starting a podcast and it's your podcast and you have the choice between being Clooney or Bean, I'm going to pick Clooney. So I did.
So that was this maybe an Asian observation of you and your likeness? So is it that white long noses all look the same, and that's how you?
It's likely all of that. Yeah,
Okay.
it definitely was. I had some students one time who told me I looked like George Clooney, and in the same day said I look like Mr. Bean as well.
Okay, Brett, we need to rebrand. I'm gonna be Brad Pitt. Who are you gonna be?
I think I'm gonna work it out. I'm not sure. I've never been really mistaken for anybody except for when people have told me that I might know something. That's a mistake, but that's that's great. I've been to China. I've done business in China, and I think it's a fascinating view of being looked at like you're in a fishbowl. You get not in the places like Shanghai and places like this, but when you get down into some of the more remote areas, it's hard to explain what that's like for people or to other people that have never experienced that. Because we walk around here in this culture as just, we're invisible. And we're invisible not only to ourselves but others, and we just kind of go through the world. And yet in a place like that, we look very different, we present ourselves very different, and we stand out. So that's the same for everybody in every culture, I guess. Yeah. But there is that kind of, getting back to the repatriation thing, is like that invisible immigrant type of identity that you have, because now you look and sound and act like everybody around you, but you do not have the tools and the facilities to practice everyday life like you used to do. So that is a common thing for people, even when they come to this country and look like us. And I think it's an interesting dynamic that people are surprised by. Yeah,
it is, and it's fascinating to me that it's like as you're adjusting to life in that culture, it can be one of the most frustrating pieces is the constant staring and the standing out and the just leave me alone, just let me be. And then coming back, there's kind of this moment of why is nobody looking at me? Like why are you not jumping over yourself to help me out? Why are you not telling me my language is great when I say hello? Like what's wrong with you?
What's up with you? Don't you people know who I am?
This being in this fishbowl. This fishbowl experience, my daughter explained that to me. She was on a school trip with her middle school class to China, I guess 2 years ago. And I have to explain a little bit because my white daughter, so my daughter is of this skin color as well. She went to a predominantly African-American middle school. So the class trip to China, I think she was the only or one of two white kids on that trip. And she came back and reported, well, yes, fishbowl, and yes, they stared at us, and yet it felt like the locals stared more at my black classmates than they stared at me.
Yeah.
So her foreignness was noted. However, it wasn't as foreign to most of the locals any longer because they've seen white people enter their country. Black people are still a minority of Western visitors,
of minorities,
right? So again, there's I guess there are levels to foreignness and otherness that people will experience as they travel abroad.
Right, absolutely, and my family is a great cross section of that. Both of my children are adopted. My daughter is Chinese ethnically, and my son is. His birth mother was white. His birth father was black. And so we've got this, like we're just this constant walking freak show in China. Like we're different. And we've got a mix of different. And so we get the normal layer of staring, but then we get a kind of a digging down deeper into the questions of. Who's your mother? Who's your father? That's impossible. You look like a Chinese girl. How can they be your parents? And that's impossible. You're too black. Like that's the conversation that we've had over and over and over again. And there's there's a frustrating and a refreshing element to kind of that, especially coming from here where all conversations around race and ethnicity and all of that are, I mean, there's backstory and there's just everything comes packed with something. And so it becomes really challenging to have those conversations. And then when you go to a culture where some of that there's not the same backstory, there's a different backstory, but it's not the same. And those kind of those barriers are culturally are stripped away. And so there's no taboo in asking the question. There's no taboo in saying you're too black, or you're too Asian, or you're too white, or you're too whatever it is, which then I translate from my culture, and my defenses rise, and I get frustrated, and then I have to recognize, wait a second, they're not commenting on my culture, they're commenting on theirs. And then we can start from there, and we can have some pretty heartfelt conversations once we get there.
Yeah, no, your family being the living proof of cultural blend, right?
Yeah.
Have you found yourself explaining your family to the world, whether it's here or abroad?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the answer to that is when we are asked, and we are asked much less here than we are abroad. Just because even adoption is kind of a not a foreign concept in China, but it's just not as commonplace as it would be here, and certainly international adoption, and there are certain layers of questions that we have to get through before we can even really have a conversation about it. But they just don't have those barriers that say don't ask, and so they do, and so then we have those conversations and we explain. We don't feel it, like it's my daughter, it's my son. It's not like we don't notice it. Of course, like it's there. It's who we are. We know that's our story, and we love our story. But that's not what we think about all the time. It's not at the forefront. And so we don't explain it until somebody else needs us to explain it to them. And then we do. And then it's depending on the people we're talking to, it's a fun conversation. Certainly feel ourselves giving a lot more grace and space for those questions abroad than we do here. It was when my daughter she was a baby. She was not quite 2 probably. And we were at the mall, and it was actually a Chinese woman. This was in the States, and it was a Chinese woman who came, and she said, is that your daughter? And I said, yeah, that's my daughter. And she's like, your wife is Chinese. And I said, no. She's adopted. And she said, oh, because you can't make one. And it was just like wow.
Straight in your face,
felt,
right?
Like, hi, what's your name? Like, that was a jump ahead in our relationship right there.
Well, what's your name and what's your sperm count? Yes.
Why isn't it on your business card? Oh my goodness!
Yeah, we're pretty wide open to conversations, but let's have one conversation at least before we get there. And so it's been, there's always some level of I have to pull back and recognize people have a frame of reference, right? Like they've had a story, they understand something. And this is my opportunity either to shrink that frame of reference and crush them and tell them, how dare you? That's a stupid question. And then they'll never ask that question again, and they will never expand their frame of reference. Or I can step back and be a little bit patient, and maybe they walk away with a little more understanding of what my life looks like. And hopefully I get the chance to do the same with their life.
Yeah. That's great. We were on a call yesterday, Kristen and I, with Brigitte, his wife, and I thought this was a great question that she asked everybody. Tell me your name, where you're from, and what the name of your book is or will be. I'm going to ask you that question because I think all of this experience that you've just like this little kind of experience of your family, what it is, what it's made up of, is a book. What would it be called, Jerry?
There's two different answers to that. One of them I can't answer because I'm actually in the process of writing a book with a co-author, and we haven't revealed that yet, and I'd be in big trouble if I revealed it here. But I'm excited about that one. But the story of my life, you know what, I would just go with the title of my blog, which is The Culture Blend, because I love that. I love I was looking back at it. I think it's coming up. Maybe next week is the 10-year anniversary of when I started that blog. And I the very first blog post that I wrote, I attached a YouTube video of the blend tech, or I don't know. There's this guy that got on YouTube and had this actual blender, and he would just put stuff in it and see how it blends. So he would put cell phones in it, and he would try anything and put it in there. And it was just kind of like that was the vision for the blog, but that's also kind of the vision for my life. Is I love to stick things in a blender and just hit the button and sit and watch what happens when things come together.
So here's maybe a more heretic question, right? This is coming from a non-American. So the narrative of the United States, or one of the narratives that has been perpetuated, is that the US is somewhat of a cultural blend, or that it blends many cultural aspects into what is now US culture. And as an outsider coming to this land and living here, I recognize that the blending stopped very early on in the process, and the big chunks and some small chunks remain. So the blender stopped working, and maybe that's a good thing, because these individual pieces still kept their integrity to a certain degree. We also recognize that the blending process is, because it's not complete, or it's never been completed, is still causing friction, right? It caused the blender to freeze up. So with your experience of living outside this country, with blending your family with blending cultures the way you did, coming back here now, recognizing the different cultural camps that have evolved and entrenched themselves, what would be a good advice for people in the United States to blend a little better without losing their identity?
Yeah,
I know it's a big question, but I'm throwing it out there.
Yeah, that's packed with so many things, right? And there are multiple layers of that. Like, there are absolutely ways to engage beyond whatever herd that you have been walking in, right? Like, and it's like, and maybe that kind of bouncing off of that metaphor, right? Like, you walk in your herd, and you know this thing, and you see your systems, and you have come to really see those as the right way of doing things. But coming to the watering hole where all of the other herds and all of the other animals gather, there's a lot of value in that, even if you don't get the chance to travel and run and see the other things. Like, there is some value in just being in the space of other cultures and really expanding that. Like, I often say, like, the worst possible thing you can have is an answer, because when you get an answer, you stop asking questions, right? And you, not only that, but you think you have a full and complete understanding of whatever it is that you ask the question about. So when people travel abroad and they move to a different country, a lot of times we go to another expat or another foreigner, and we say, hey, help me understand face, the concept of saving face in China, which is a millennium. What's the plural of it's millenniums? Long. Like there's so much depth, right? Like, and that is packed so deep, and you will never. You could spend the rest of your life trying to understand face, and you will never grasp it in the way that a teenager who has grown up and feels it because it's been packed into them. Like, you will never grasp it at that level. But when you go and you ask the guy who's been there for a year, hey, help me understand face, and he's like, oh yeah, well, it's just like being embarrassed, and you're like, okay, now I got it. And it's toxic for you to think that you understand that at that level, right? But because you got an answer, you don't need to ask the question anymore. And so I think just continuing to press the boundaries, press the edges of, first go to the watering hole. Yeah, like there's some value in just going to the Chinese restaurant and having a conversation. There is some value to that, but you don't understand China because you go to First Walk, right? So press edges and continue to build relationships to the point that you're actually learning to love and have genuine relationship with people, so that you can go underneath the surface of all of that, and you will get a much better picture of saving face and everything else, but you still won't grasp it. So you still need to continue to ask questions, and at whatever resources you have to do that, whatever opportunities you have. I'm a big fan of that. I'm an encourager of people to continue to engage with people who see the world from a different perspective, because I think it shapes us and changes us and gives us an opportunity that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
I think that's a great quote. The worst thing you can have is an answer. That's fantastic.
Really is.
That's great. Because in my time in China, I had the resource of a wonderful young lady who ran the office, and we would have some really intense conversations. And I think she was surprised by the fact that I did that. It was just because I was curious, and I certainly made my mistakes and I bumbled through. But it was great to have somebody like that was willing to have those conversations and go deeper. And I'd never learnt it all, and I would get to the end of my life and not learn it all. But it's a fascinating culture. Well, I mean, Jerry, thank you so much. This has been great.
Hey, thank you.
Going all day. George,
this is fun.
Well, I actually rather like the Mr. Bean. I think Mr. Bean's funny. I would love you to
see it. Can you see it?
I think that's fantastic. I'd stick with that one. I think that's
Diesel and Bean. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for a great.
I do want to thank you for helping us create the watering hole. I think I like that metaphor quite a bit, and I think it's upon us, as those of us who have developed peripheral vision, to allow others to develop it too without putting pressure on them. So let's keep creating a bigger watering hole with more people to come to it and ask questions and engage. I'm here for that. Thank you for being a part of that process, Jerry.
Thanks. Thank you. I'm excited to be a part of it with people like you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. We'll be tuning in to Diesel and Clooney.
Yes.
And I'm happy to be disappointed that you're not them. That's fine. No problem.
You're our target market. People who are not afraid to be disappointed.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. See you all again tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye.